Hello. So I'm cutting vegetables ready for Sunday dinner and getting quite angry while I do it because yet another article has come out in the papers today about the VAT on education court case. And it is where the government have decided that a report that was used within the court case is no longer admissible. They don't want it to be admissible. They've decided that actually, even though it's a report that Bridget Phillipson herself has used when she has cited that special educational needs system in state is broken, and even though Bridget Phillipson has endorsed and said, yeah, what this is saying is true, we are now not allowed to use that to prove that the children in the private sector who would have to come out of the private sector because of VAT on education and they can no longer afford it would go into the state system. The government's saying the state system can support them. The parents are saying no, it can't, by the very admission of this report, which your own MPs and the Education Secretary have cited. They have already said it cannot cope with them. So what's happened is the government at the 11th hour, having heard all of this information, having known that the claimants were going to refer to it, have said, actually, no, we've changed our mind. Don't use it. We want that scrubbed out of the entire proceedings. So the 3 days in court that happened at the beginning of April, you may not refer to that when you're making your ruling. Well, it's happened and it's done. So why are we doing that at the 11th hour? And to me personally, why they're doing it is they're desperate because they know that, well, certainly my perception is, well, you've lost. Because how can you defend that? How can you say that a child whose needs are being met in private education will be met in state education when we've all openly seen, admitted and acknowledged that those needs are not being met for the kids that are in state education, let alone the ones that are coming into state from private? To me, unless I'm missing something massive here, it's black and white. It's obvious. Now, does it make it fair for the kids in state education? Well, no, it doesn't. And that is what everyone has been fighting against. Everyone has been saying the SEND system in state needs radically overhauling. EHCPs need radically overhauling. Support needs radically overhauling. No one has ever argued that state SEND is working. It's not. But what people have argued is that those parents who are able to or have made the choice to afford private education for their SEND kids, but can now no longer afford it because of the imposition of VAT on fees and national insurance and employer contribution, that's now unaffordable. So where does their child go? Where do they go when they come out of private? Because we know the government have argued that state provides a satisfactory level of education. But of course, it doesn't, because the government have also, by their own admission, said that SEND doesn't work and it isn't providing satisfactory education. So we can see the massive conflict, can't we? We can see that the government have said that it's not working, but it is working in terms of when you're taking kids out of private school. But which one is it? You know my favourite phrase, pick a lane. It's not. And I feel, Bridget, Keir, Rachel, you've missed a massive mark on this, because when you're arguing this, you're arguing it for the textbook child. But because, Bridget, you haven't been to any private schools, you don't know the children you're talking about. You don't know what their needs are. So I'm going to give you an example of just one child who is autistic, who cannot access state education. And for the people that say to me, well, what do you mean they cannot access state education? Well, this is why. So with autism, there can be many components. It's a spectrum for a reason. So for a lot of the kids that have autism, let's imagine that we're talking about the sensory components. So what that means is smells, sounds, noises, lights. It's too much. So if you're in an environment where your senses are bombarded with a lot of sounds that can physically hurt. So we've all done the imagine what it feels like to have nails going down a blackboard. Well, for an autistic child, that could be literally all you hear all day from the sounds of a school. It's akin to that. It has the same reaction to that. It can physically hurt. So your body, your central nervous system is already elevated. You're already on high alert and anxious. And then we've got the smells that can invoke certain feelings and certain responses. The light, if it's too bright, that can actually physically hurt. Or if it's too dark, it can feel really oppressive and really overwhelming. And then we've got the teaching styles. And you're in a classroom with perhaps up to 35 other children who are making naturally different noises, different sounds, moving chairs, moving pens, moving pencils, clicking on keyboards, putting hands up, asking questions. It's an assault on every sense. And for many autistic children, that is just too much. They can't process it, they can't cope with it. And if you haven't heard the phrase autistic meltdown, I'll explain it. What that can look like is a child literally retreating into itself, trying to survive. It's the survival response. It's a response of a system that has exploded and can do no more than just physically survive. So you may see a child in a corner in the brace position almost, rocking, crying, screaming, scratching their hair, pulling parts of their clothes, scratching their bodies, doing anything they possibly can to try and self-regulate because they cannot regulate what's going on around them. Now that is an autistic response. Does it mean that that child can't learn? No. Does it mean that that child is stupid? No. Does it mean that that child does not have the same academic potential as any other child? No. Does it mean that they are autistic and they cannot cope with that environment? Yes. So what do you do with that? What do you do with that child? Well, for some parents, going to private school is not possible. So they perhaps look at scholarships, they perhaps look at bursaries, or they perhaps look at supporting that child within the state system. They may look at homeschooling. They may try and work with the school so that the school will adapt with them. But of course, we know that if the children don't turn up to school, and for lots of autistic kids, getting out of bed to go into school is a step too far. So then they're marked as absent. So then their parents get fined. So then their parents could be fined actually more than the private school fees. Or you have the parents that go, this is not working. We cannot do this. So we're going to have to do something to give them an education. And that could be sell the house, sell the car, borrow some money, take out a loan, put it on a credit card fee, do whatever it takes to get the child into education, to access education. That's what it looks like. Now, it's really easy if you've not had to experience that to go, just pay your fees. Shut up and pay up. Just pay your fees. Everyone else has to. I've heard it over and over and over again. But of course, the parents of the private school children are not paying their tax. They're paying tax, but they're not using it in a state setting because they can't. Not because they don't want to, not because they want to shell out on fees, but because they can't. There is a barrier to education, and that barrier in this instance that we're talking about is autism. Now, you can overcome that barrier in certain places. And when we talk about overcoming, are we saying that the autistic child that is in private education, as soon as they're in private education, has life easy? No. We're talking about the autistic child that is in private education that is having part of their life managed and supported. They've still got to deal with everything in day-to-day life. Autism is not something that we accommodate very kindly in society. It's not something that we often think about. It's not a disability that you can see. But autism is something that if you are autistic, you deal with it and its challenges every day. It's exhausting, trust me. So for parents of autistic children, when they say you had a choice, they look at you as if to go, well, what was my choice? To watch my child become a safeguarding risk to themselves, to watch my child self-harm, to watch my child have suicidal thoughts, to watch my child be unable to get out of bed in the morning, to watch my child retreat into themselves until I don't recognise them as my child anymore, to watch my child become so scared of the world they don't want to be part of it. That's the reality of what autistic parents or parents of autistic children, who of course will probably be autistic themselves because of course it does go down families, but that's the reality of what many parents are seeing in front of them every single school day. And to be told, just get on with it, pay, as though that's going to solve anything and as though you're not contributing to society anyway, is the biggest insult ever. If you can imagine for a second what it's like trying to support your child, the thing you love the most in the world, through this, let me tell you, it pushes you to places you think could never go to. I cannot begin to put into words the pain that a parent feels watching their child trying to navigate this pathway. And then to be punished by a tax describing the education that they are receiving that is just about managing to glue some of the bits together as a luxury. I find no luxury in being autistic or having an autistic child. There are so many attributes about being autistic that are amazing, that should be celebrated, that are wonderful, that create such a richness and a beauty in society. But because we're so busy trying to manage fitting a square peg into a round hole, because that's what society says we must do, and that's what the education system says we must do, we're trying to reshape our child and knock those wonderful components of them off so that they fit in a state system. And if they don't fit in a state system, then they have to justify through an EHCP why they could possibly dare to entertain the thought of having an education that would suit their own needs. They have to justify their very existence. And yet we get abuse. We get called Tarquin and Philomena, and stop paying for Netflix and stop eating avocados. And if you're rich enough to pay for the fees in the first place, then you can suck it up and pay for it. You have no idea. You have absolutely no idea. So when I see articles like this in the paper, and I see that another government tactic to try and shirk its responsibilities to children with special educational needs and disabilities, off the back of welfare, off the back of pensioners, off the back of farmers, off the back of care homes, off the back of hospices, I look at a government that has no morals, has no integrity, has no respect for human beings. And we are penalising and punishing the most vulnerable in society. I felt, Bridget, Keir, Rach, Ange, you ought to know what the reality of being the parent of a special educational needs child looks like. Not that I should have to say this to you, not that I should have to justify this to you. I should never have to justify it to you. But when you say that state can provide a satisfactory system, form of education, satisfactory isn't good enough. And for a lot of children with SEN needs, satisfactory is not possible. It has to be bespoke. It has to be supportive of individual needs. One size, as Daniel Kabidi himself has said, does not fit all. So this last minute ditch attempt of yours to try and undermine the children that have so bravely spoken and the families that have so bravely spoken about how they cannot access state, that is why. And if you are too ignorant to respect that, then this court case will just keep going and going and going, because it will be another persecuted state in society that will take it upon themselves to take you to court. But you will waste taxpayers' money. The amount of money that you have spent defending this, you could have provided support for children in state that need it so much. There is a way to support them. There is a way to fund this, but it is not by taking the needs of another child, taking those away, taking the support from them away to put in another child's education, because nobody wins, everyone loses. And the fact that I'm having to explain this to you, you are supposed to be educated people. You are supposed to be acting in the national interest. Will you tell that to the child that cannot access state? That is not acting in the national interest. That is acting against it.